Up next, we have our panel that will focus on the need to repair America and the economic and environmental benefits of repairing our nation's infrastructure systems, from energy transmission and water to transportation and communications. Moderating the panel and introducing our guests will be Dan Carroll. Dan is the Director of Multi-State Initiatives for Governor John Kitzhaber of Oregon. This first-in-the-nation position was created to advance job creation, clean energy, and infrastructure through innovative partnerships, including the West Coast Infrastructure Exchange. Prior to joining Governor Kitzhaber's office, Dan was Senior Fellow for Innovation and Clean Economy at the New Policy Institute in Washington, D.C., where he focused on new strategies to accelerate community-based job creation. Please join me in welcoming our panel and Dan Carroll. Dan?
Thanks, Dave. Thank you. Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. We've assembled a great panel to start digging into the infrastructure issue today. I'm Dan Carroll, your friendly moderator. Had way too nice of an introduction from Dave Foster. Want to quickly introduce the panel. Francis Beinecke, the president of the NRDC. Greg DiLoreto, the past president of the American Society of Civil Engineers. Mike Langford, the national president of the National Utility Workers Union. And Ralph LaRosa, the president of New Jersey's largest utility, public service, electric and gas. This is the first of two plenary panels today on the infrastructure issue. And what we're going to try to do is try to unpack some of the issues and details of this multi-trillion-dollar challenge into some digestible chunks. Because it's early and it's Monday and maybe your coffee is just kicking in, we're going to try to talk about, and we're talking about infrastructure, which sometimes is not the sexiest topic out there. I thought it would try to help you give a heads up by trying to flag some of the early takeaways to look for today. And at the same time, during the panel, we'll throw out the names of some cool websites. So if you're live blogging mode or at hashtag Repair America, we can give you a head start on getting some content out to your folks. So quickly, takeaway number one. There's no silver bullet out there for fixing the infrastructure problem. No single green bank, clean bank, infrastructure bank, PPP, or Wall Street wizard is going to do it like magic. We need to build a new system, and we need to build it together. Second takeaway, there's different types of infrastructure, and they have different types of challenges and different business models. Water, wastewater, energy generation, transmission, ports, roads, transit all work a little bit differently. And they get paid for a little bit differently, so we need to think and act accordingly, and our panelists will address a lot of the different individual sectors. Lastly, and maybe this is a takeaway, maybe it's a debating point, but we've actually been a little bit better than you might think on building certain types of new infrastructure. Where we've been really lousy is in maintaining it, and most importantly, as we look forward to the challenges of climate change, figuring out how we're going to make that infrastructure resilient is a huge, huge challenge. So let's dig in. Greg DiLoreto, I want to go to you first. Greg is the president, as I said, of the American Society of Civil Engineers, and our first little web throw out, infrastructurereportcard.org is the report card that the ASCE often puts out with some kind of depressing grades. Reminds me of my teenager sometimes and his grades. Greg, tell us a little bit about the challenge on infrastructure.
Well, thank you. Well, since 1998, ASCE has been putting out a report card on the condition of America's infrastructure. We do it every 4 years. It's a snapshot in time to tell us how we're doing as a nation on the condition of our infrastructure. It covers 16 categories of infrastructure: road, bridges, electrical, parks, schools, and so forth. Our latest report card that came out just about a year ago now gave our nation a grade of D+ for our infrastructure overall. That's up slightly from the D that we got in 2009. But I know, you got to be happy about that. We're improving. But what we found was where we invested in infrastructure, the grades went up. Now, we also found out what happens if we don't make these investments. And we saw that if by 2020 we don't make about $3.6 trillion we believe is necessary to bring our infrastructure to a grade of B, if we fail to make that investment, we will see a loss in 2020 alone of 3.5 million jobs. In that year alone, at all levels. We'll see a loss of $3,100 per American household per year if we don't make that investment. We'll see a loss in our GDP equal to France's GDP in 2011 if we don't make that investment. So the point that we're trying to point out is that if we want to enjoy the economic prosperity that we always have and the quality of life we've enjoyed, we're going to need to make these investments in our infrastructure.
Thank you. So Francis, Beinecke, here comes the climate crisis, here comes NRDC. How are you guys looking at the challenges of climate and engaging around the infrastructure question?
Well, I think first of all, there's no question that the climate is changing, and just in the last year, some parts of the United States have been the hottest ever recorded. Some places have been the driest ever recorded. I think everyone here is very familiar with the very, very serious drought in California right now, and some places have been the wettest ever recorded. So I think what's happening, and it's very clear, it's not from models, it's from actual experience, the climate is changing. It's changing more rapidly than the scientific community had projected originally, but they're seeing the changes. So as we plan for infrastructure, we have to plan for a very different future. We have to make the infrastructure resilient. We have to project what happens when it's hotter, drier, wetter, and I would just say from this winter's experience, colder in many places as well. And we have to prepare for that. So, you know, if you look at Hurricane Sandy in New York, which was devastating, New York has projected a $20 billion investment to make the city resilient, and that's only one city in America.
Mike Langford, let's go to Sandy. So your members were on the front lines of Sandy, experienced, hopefully we're not going to have more of them, but in all likelihood we are. What's been the perspective of your members, how the human capital challenges, and how you guys are engaging on this issue?
Well, as many of you just saw the video with post-Sandy, and Sandy really highlighted and brought out what the vulnerabilities of the utility industry really is out there, be it gas, be it electric, or water, and wastewater. I mean, they're all subject to severe, disasters, basically, when these weather conditions are such as Sandy. And Sandy really highlighted it again, but if you really look, there's been a lot since Sandy. In Michigan, anybody from Michigan suffered through that ice storm of 500,000 people? A couple days before Christmas, it was a 9-day outage. And you look at here just now, there's still people without power in Pennsylvania and Maryland, which there's crews from all around the country going to repair these places, outages lasting multiple days. So, yeah, Sandy brought the awareness. Our folks, as you can see, are first responders. They're down in the trenches, the women and men who make up utility workers. They put their lives on the job every day. And they know what these infrastructures are built like because they have to work down in them. So, yes, we need to repair them. You heard that it's rated at a D+. I don't think all of it is. I think some of it's still at a D-. And for instance, we're talking about natural disasters, but there's also man-made disasters. A lot of you probably saw in Charleston, West Virginia, that chemical spill. Well, the water plant there, American Water, who produces the fresh drinking water for people, their facility took in that contaminant. Well, their facility loses 37.5% of the water that they produce. Can you imagine that? 37.5% of the product that you make goes right out into the ground or into the wastewater systems. And you heard California's in a severe drought. Well, I bet they'd like that 37.5% water right now. Because if you think about it, we lose 7 billion gallons of fresh water all the time. I mean, that's a tremendous amount of water. The grid system, I've said it before, where the Chinese have built transmission lines where their voltage drop over a 1,200-mile radius is like 7%. Ours, with that same line, would be 80% over that same distance with what we have. They have 1,000,000 kW. We have 765 as our highest. So you see, there's some things that can change that we can force to happen by making people get engaged, not making people, but getting people engaged with the process here to go to their politicians, go to their communities, go to their public service commissions to really drive home the message that this is just not sustainable for what we're dealing with here and that we have to make a change. And that's why you've heard the earlier speakers talk about Repair America, RECAP, the amount of methane that comes out of leaking gas pipes, natural gas, that methane is 10 to 12 times worse than carbon dioxide. It equates to about 120 million automobiles just due to the fact of leaky pipes. Look how many jobs we can put back. People working, good jobs. So you can see there's a tremendous amount of work. Our folks are on the front lines. We're not giving up. We're a part of this campaign of Repair America. We're not going to back down. We're not going to slow down. I don't care what trade agreements they're throwing at us. We have to fight against all those, like Rich Trumpka said. But we have to even the playing field. We need to work with the utilities across the country. We need to work with the legislators across the country, the public service commissioners, the environmentalists, to all come together for a common goal is to rebuild our gas, electric, and water and wastewater systems, because they really are at the end of their useful life. And we can't allow that.
Thanks, Mike. So Ralph, let's start teeing up some solutions. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the Energy Strong program that your company's involved in?
Yeah, sure. Energy Strong is our response to Sandy, and we've really focused on rebuilding our infrastructure and the electric grid. But let me just take a little bit of a step back. I mean, I agree with everything that was said here. And if we can all get on the same page and get on the same train and go convince people that this makes sense, this is a no-brainer. We got old stuff. The weather's changing. We got a lot of people that want to help fix it. So, you know, if I just step back a little bit, I had the opportunity to not only live through Sandy in an operations role, but I also lived through the 2003 blackout. And if you recall back then in the Northeast, one tree took down the entire grid. I mean, what does that tell you about the infrastructure and how fragile it is? But I would tell you that FERC stepped up and did the right thing. FERC put incentives in place that brought investors to the table. Utilities like us were able to invest. So what we've done in New Jersey, and now we're trying to replicate it with Energy Strong, is we made investments just last year over $1.9 billion. $1.9 billion in New Jersey on transmission, because the FERC sent clear signals that they wanted the system rebuilt, they wanted it rebuilt the right way, and they wanted to use new technology. So we've stepped up and done it. Investors are looking to make that investment. We'll solve some of the issues that we have as far as building infrastructure for the new weather. We'll have it new, and we're going to put a ton of people to work. We just have to replicate that model that was put in place in 2003 in each one of the states, and there's no more powerful voice to make that happen than the three that we just heard here.
Excellent, excellent. So Greg, let's talk a little bit about transportation and transit. The ASCE and labor partners recently funded an effort, and a number of governors, bipartisan, 17 governors, including, surprisingly, mine, signed a letter calling for rapid funding of the Highway Trust Fund. So on transportation, transit, you want to touch on that a little bit?
Well, transportation, particularly roads and bridges, grades rose in the last report card. Roads rose to a grade of D, mainly because of stimulus funding. We did a lot of paving projects with the stimulus money, but it's gone. And so we're not seeing that. Bridges went to a grade of C+ because the cities, the counties, and the states all got together and pooled their money to try to fix our bridges. But we still have 1 in 9 are structurally deficient. And we estimate it would take about $8 billion a year through 2020 to get those bridges, to get that category erased, to get that backlog. The fact is that 40% of America's urban highways are congested, and Americans waste about 2 billion gallons of gas a year sitting in traffic. At $3 to $3.50 a gallon, that's about $7 billion we're wasting. We're spending it, we're not getting anything for it. But we have a worse problem facing us right now. It's estimated by the end of this fiscal year, the Federal Highway Trust Fund will be bankrupt. And that means a reduction to states of some to 92%, some people say it's 100% reduction in federal money to our states for transportation projects. Most states get about half of their transportation money from the federal government. This is both transit as well as roads. So you can imagine what's going to happen to your state if it's already, and all of them are, underfunded in terms of road conditions. Already, state DOT directors are not obligating new projects. We went through this last time when MAP 21 came out. They stopped obligating new projects because they didn't know if there was going to be any federal money to pay for them. They've already stopped doing that. It's estimated that right now, we need a 10-cent increase in the gas tax. Right now, right today, if we're going to continue at the level of funding. And we are not improving the condition of our transportation system. Transit got a grade of D. It didn't change over the last 4 years. And in transit's case, over 45% of Americans in urban areas do not have access to transit. Those that do are increasing their ridership. But our bus systems are not being replaced. Our transit systems aren't being replaced. And so the grade doesn't go up. Again, it affects our economic prosperity and our quality of life. And all of us, and not in this room, but every American has to commit that an infrastructure is important to their quality of life.
Thanks. So, Francis, President Trump noted that AFL-CIO is retooling their headquarters, so shifting over to the energy efficiency issue. We all know that energy not used is probably the cheapest way to attack some of our energy and climate challenges. Tell us about the new NRDC effort to work with cities around the country.
Well, we've just rolled out an effort called the Clean Energy Project with 10 cities across America: Atlanta, Denver, Salt Lake City, Philadelphia, Chicago, Kansas City, and others. The purpose is really to work with the mayors, and I think the mayors are a really important center of leadership in this country to design how to make their commercial building sector as energy efficient as possible and how to make it as resilient as possible. So this is investing in our communities in a smart, sustainable way, both to save money, to save energy, and to make the buildings resilient. And you know, it's very exciting actually to work in cities all across the country, because I think it will pave the way for more and more cities. We've worked in New York, we've worked in Los Angeles. These are 10 more cities, and this project, which is just 10 cities, will save the consumer $1 billion a year in energy costs. So we're making them smarter, we're making them less expensive, and we're making them more resilient for a clean energy future that has a very grave climate challenge. It's very exciting, and we're very happy to be part of it.
Right, and these are very investable projects, which brings us to our second web round. So ullico.com, ULLICO.com. It's a labor pension fund investor that's already investing in infrastructure solutions around the country. Mike, to you, you were telling us when we were prepping for the panel about some interesting stuff going on in Illinois that was pretty exciting in terms of infrastructure innovation.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, when we talk about this, there is some success stories out there. And I'd like to just comment the fact that the state of Illinois last year, we were able to partner up. I mean, the Blue-Green did a lot of the other labor unions within the state, the governor, business, People's Gas, Integris, all partnered up to get some legislation passed to actually rebuild the gas infrastructure in the state. And in the process, we're getting veterans coming back and putting them back to work in good, sustainable living wage jobs within the utility workers, rebuilding that infrastructure. So that's a huge success story. We're supporting the Energy Strong in New Jersey with Ralph and his company, and these are the types of things that we really need to go state by state and turn that into a success story to emulate what's happening in Illinois.
That's great. That's great. So we all know, Ralph, about the natural gas supply revolution. We know that it has great potential as a critical transition fuel on climate. But we also know we have lots and lots of pipelines, and as Mike brought up, the methane issue is huge. You want to paint a little picture on the scale of this challenge for us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you just look at our utility. We have the largest footprint of cast iron in the country, just in New Jersey. So it's a constant challenge for us. And as Mike said, you know, we're trying to work together with all of our union partners to find a way to replace more of that. But it really gets down to the consumer. What is the consumer willing to bear? If you look at the percentage of disposable income that's been used that is used on utilities by consumers, it has not changed over the past 50 years. It's been relatively flat. So what we'll have to figure out as a society is how much more are we willing to put in. Infrastructure is core to what we do. As individuals, as humans, we need to get around, we need to be able to turn the lights on. That's what's really changed for us. We want to use less electricity. We're out there spending lots of money with Mike's folks and a lot of other folks trying to find ways to deploy energy efficiency solutions. We're constantly doing that as a utility, but nevertheless, there's still, when people want their electricity, when they want their gas, when they want their water, they want it now and they want it to be secure. And we've got to find a way to balance those two pieces so we can make the investments and that we don't drive prices up for consumers too much.
Great. Greg DiLoreto, we're reading a lot about drought all over the place. We also know that on energy generation, water is a huge issue. So the water challenge is huge. Your day job is running a major water district in my state, Oregon. What are you working on, or what's happening in our region that might be helpful for others to know about?
Sure. Well, and there's no question that water supply and energy supply are two big issues facing the economic prosperity of our country. The area that I come from, the Portland area, we are blessed to have multiple water sources. But the fact is, and I've noticed this with my colleagues that run water utilities around the country, the per capita use of water anyway has dropped over the last several years. And in fact, in my utility, amazingly enough, we're using less water now per capita than we did in the 1960s. We've gone back in time. Now, we've a number of programs throughout the country, both in electric and water, about water. We call it water conservation. I call it wise water use, such that customers understand what's the best way to use water. And so you go to various parts of the country. Las Vegas pays you to tear out your grass, so we're not watering lawns anymore. My part of the world, we had a number of wise water usages. But that doesn't eliminate the need for more water. And so the fact is, we're in the process of $1 billion water expansion for our area. But these things take decades to build. By the time you go through the planning process, by the time you do the permitting process, by the time you do the design and construction, they can take decades. More to the point that Francis made, though, we're trying to train our engineers in how they do these projects differently. So part of the work we do is on resiliency. We're not going to design them the way we used to in the old days. We're trying to make them resilient. The other part is on sustainability. And to that end, ASCE, together with the American Public Works Association and the American Consulting Engineers Council, has created the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure. And it provides us as designers with tools, more like a LEED-like based tool, if you're familiar with leadership and energy and design, more like that type of tool, so that we can start designing these projects so that they meet the triple bottom line of the environment, of society, and economics. And that's helping us to build better projects in the future.
Thank you. And thank you for queuing up the third little web commercial here. The Water Utility Climate Alliance. It's kind of a clunky WUCAonline.org, WUCAonline.org. But along with ISI is a group of water utilities around the country that are trying to address the climate thing. Mike, I'm going to go to you a second and talk about some of the water horror stories that we see out there. My governor likes to say a lot that, people moan and groan if their water bill goes from $30 to $35 a month, but they happily pay $150 a month for their Comcast bundle. Not that we don't want that kind of infrastructure for small business, et cetera, but goes to show how important it is also for mayors and governors to push and make clear how cheap and what an incredible benefit clean water is and wastewater is, et cetera. So as you guys deal with these issues, what are some of the horror stories that you're seeing out there in terms of maintenance?
Well, you heard the Charleston, West Virginia. That was just one example. But again, when you are losing that amount of water, 7 billion gallons, there's a lot of room for improvement. And that's what I said when I was talking about systems. Really, water and wastewater is at its end of its useful life. They're in flood-prone zones that need to be rebuilt completely. And we really need, we're putting a lot of emphasis on natural gas due to the methane, but we really need to put just as much emphasis on the whole water infrastructure also, because it is probably still at a D-, I'm assuming. It's a D. It picked up a half. Okay, so, but it's in bad shape, and we have to bring it to people's attention to demand better, because it takes water to sustain life.
Francis, resilience. It's a word that we're hearing more and more about, how to think about infrastructure systems and how to design them. Can you share with us some of the different design considerations and issues around this?
So just take an example, sea level rise. Sea level rise is happening. It's happening all across the country, all across the world. That means you have to build things higher, and you have to put building infrastructure higher up in the building. One of the consequences of Sandy was New York University Hospital had to close. Not only did they have to evacuate the whole hospital, they lost years of research because their database and their experiments were flooded. And they had planned for a 9-foot surge, except the surge was 12 feet. So really understanding where the trends are, putting things up, both using green infrastructure to create softer barriers, which is happening in Philadelphia, New York, and other cities, but also figuring out how to fortify the parts of the cities that you cannot use green infrastructure in. So, thinking through, and I think Greg made this point, thinking through what are the changes that are going to happen, how to prepare for them, designing differently for that. And that is going to be evolving, because really we can't project what's going to happen 50 to 100 years from now, but we're actually building for a 30 or 40-year cycle in infrastructure. So that creates a tremendous challenge for the designers, and it means we have to both have continuing learning and put flexibility into the ongoing design requirements, because in many ways we're learning on the job. You know, speaking of water, 11 billion gallons of sewage flooded into the New York waterways after Sandy. 11 billion, because every sewage treatment plant overflowed. EPA estimated that we need $300 billion investment in our water treatment systems, both in the sewage treatment systems and stormwater runoff, and in how we manage these systems. So, you know, I'm sure we all look at that as a tremendous opportunity. You know, we want that $300 billion invested to create jobs and to improve the quality in the environment, and we have to work together to make that happen and work together to figure out how we make our systems as resilient as we can going forward.
So our Energy Strong program absolutely addresses exactly this. So we'll just take Hoboken, the city of Hoboken, which is a microcosm.
Which is very much in the news these days.
For other reasons, but it's been a microcosm
I was going to make
of what happened. Yeah, I'll say what. If you just really step back, we had the electric grid was completely underwater. So all the substations in Hoboken were underwater. The gas mains were flooded because there were low-pressure cast iron gas mains where you had water infiltration. And then within a week of that, because of the type of structure that's underneath a lot of the pipes in that city, it's a very, it's a tidal area, we started to see a number of water main breaks. In addition to that, we had the wastewater issues. So that one little area saw every bit of it. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to replace a lot of the cast iron. We're trying to rebuild some of the water companies, trying to rebuild some of the infrastructure. But at the end of the day, we still get pushback. We've been at this Energy Strong program, a $2.6 billion 5-year program that we proposed to the state of New Jersey a year and a couple months ago, and we still get pushback. We get pushback because folks don't want to see any increase in the rates. And the best thing that I can tell everybody in this room is get together, do what Mike is doing. We're working with environmental partners, we're working with engineers, but most importantly, we're working with our unions, and they're all walking into those hearings with the PSC in New Jersey and saying, we need this. It's the right thing to do, and it's the right time to do it. Don't forget, commodity prices have come down. Commodity prices have come down because of the natural gas revolution and the impact not only on natural gas itself, but also on the electric grid and the price to generate. So you got a great opportunity now to rebuild this infrastructure, and it'd be a real shame for us to miss it.
Ralph, I want to stay with this a little bit because, we're at the Blue-Green Conference, labor and environment, and what color is business, what color is utility, and in general, most people don't wake up in the morning going, I love my utility, I want to push for more rates. But if you think about the economic competitiveness frame, you think of the job creation frame, and for some of these things, water and electricity, pretty good deal. The whole issue of how do we get more people getting the business voice lifted up, I think, is important. Quick commercial, number 4, there's something called Infrastructure Week 2014, infrastructureweek2014.com. It's going to be happening in DC the week of May 12th, and you have the Council on Competitiveness, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, labor partners, and others coming together to raise the profile on infrastructure. So back to you, Ralph. Tell us a little bit more of what it takes to raise rates and how utility commissions work, because I think a lot of people have a vague idea and how you make profits, all that sort of stuff, because I think it's an important thing for people to understand.
Well, from a utility perspective, it's pretty simple. Utilities make an investment, we earn a return on that investment, just like a bank. So if we were to borrow money for the infrastructure, we earn a return on that, but only for half of it. The other half is funded by debt, and it's just to pay back the bondholders. And right now, a utility like ours can pretty much borrow that debt at just about the same rates that the U.S. Treasury is, a little bit above that. So it's a great time. Again, interest rates were low, they can remain low. So it's a great time for half of that. So if I spend $1, 50 cents of it I borrow that way. The other 50 cents I borrow from a shareholder. And that shareholder is expecting a return. And those rates have gone up and down over the last few years, somewhere between 8 and 11%. But if you want investors to flock to this industry, you put the right rates out there like the FERC has done. And as a result, we've seen the investors come to the table. Then we get together with the partners like we have here. And we just go to the PSC and we say, look, now's the right time. We'll raise the rates to whatever level you feel comfortable with in this state, and we'll set the infrastructure spend that supports that. And then what does that wind up doing? Well, we've put hundreds of more workers, IBW workers, to work in New Jersey rebuilding the transmission infrastructure. Why? We had a clear path. We understood the methodology and how we were going to get the return, and we were able to put those people to work. Not only do we do that, but working with Mike's union and a number of other unions, we've extended our contracts. We don't even sit there and argue across the table anymore. There's certainty among all of us as to how we're going to be working, and it makes life a lot simpler for everybody. We just go ahead, we replace the infrastructure, the ratepayers know what the rates are going to be, the regulators see the path, and the more that we do that, like was done in Illinois, and we replicate that model across in New Jersey with Energy Strong, but across the country, the better it's going to be for all of us.
Greg, and then Francis.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that because I ran a publicly owned utility different than a investor-owned utility. So there's another group that you have to keep in mind, and that these publicly owned utilities answer directly to the city council, or in my case, a special district. And we don't go to we do not go to a PUC. So you have an obligation, and I don't see this happening, and I never saw it when I worked, of going and talking to your city council, or going to talk to the special service district that provides your water and sewer rates, or in some cases in Washington, even your power, and talking to them about this investment that's needed in rates. I would raise water rates every single year, at least by inflation. And I work with all my customers, and we serve some 200,000 customers in that area. And I never had pushback on rate increases because I talked to them about, number one, how we were spending every dollar they gave us effectively, and number two, what they were going to get with the increased water rate. And I actually had, as an anecdote, I had a customer come in, a couple of them come in and go, we don't think you're raising them enough. We don't think you're doing enough in terms of the investment in this infrastructure. Now, it's rare, but I had that happen. To the second point, I had customers come to me one time and say, we had a water outage. I don't care what it costs. I want to make sure I have that water 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But you have to go out and talk to these city councilors about the importance that this has to your quality of life and your economy.
Francis?
So I mean, Ralph's exactly right. People are very concerned about rates, but that's why the efficiency investment is so valuable. So we need a system that is clean, reliable, and affordable. NRDC's just started a project on affordable housing to make affordable housing much more energy efficient, so the consumer actually can actually keep their costs down, even as we make the investments that we have to make.
And the right way to do that is to somewhat decouple the actual payment to the utility from the throughput. Because if you just listen to what was said here, rates are set based upon, even if you keep them at inflation, and we want to pay everybody at inflation, same raises for everybody across the board at inflation levels. But so if that's just going up normally and you have usage coming down, the utilities don't take in enough money to actually cover that cost. So the way you do that is you break that cycle. In the past, the usage was going up, rates were going up, it was a nice model. Now, if we just want to replace the infrastructure at the same rate at which we had put it in, we need to split those two forces.
Absolutely.
And I would add, as everyone looks at how do we build this challenge together and everyone raise their game in terms of dealing with climate resilience, in terms of the kind of engagement, in terms of the kind of leadership that Mike and his union have shown. On the government side, what we're increasingly seeing is the importance of doing life cycle cost analysis and looking at these public assets as something that has 30, 40, 50-year life as opposed to just the capital costs. We'll worry about the maintenance later. I'll throw two more websites onto the pile as we're in wrap-up mode just about. One is westcoastinfrastructure.org. It's the 3 governors on the West Coast trying to build pilot projects that are taxpayer smart and climate friendly and do this new life cycle cost analysis, so you can check that out. And then a second thing I would put out is we look at the issue of how do you get private capital in. If you're going to do a smart PPP, you'll hear this term public-private partnership out there. Where we've been really impressed is in Canada, they keep it 100% publicly owned, but they look at ways to partner with the private sector. And particularly in British Columbia, we've been copying a lot of homework with them. Partnershipsbc.ca, partnershipsbc.ca. I think there's a lot of interesting practice there. I'm going to do a quick 20-second wrap-up from everyone. The one thing you want this audience to do when they go home. We'll start with Mike.
Well, just in closing, we've talked a lot about the infrastructure, but another part of the infrastructure that we sometimes often forget, especially as we're going to a less carbon type energy system, is the stranded workers and the stranded communities that we deal with out there. And, you know, we're proposing, again, it goes back to financing, some sort of wires charge to really transition workers who are getting left behind because of the closing of coal plants or nuke plants, whatever it may be. But not only those workers, but everybody, the ancillary workers that are connected to that, building trades in the outage type situations, and also the communities who gain from the tax bases there are losing out. So we really need to look at how do we manufacture different types of clean energy in these communities and also transition those workers. So that's my spiel in closing. We need to think about that and look at ways and how to finance that. And a wires charge, that's the cash register, right, Ralph?
That's right.
Of the utilities. So that's where we really need to focus on.
Ralph, your closing spiel?
Read up on FERC, what FERC did back in 2003. Read a little bit about what was done in Illinois in the last year or two, and then work together with your companies and with your suppliers and your environmental communities to bring this message forward. It's a good story, it's an easy story to tell, and it's a tough one to argue with.
Greg?
Yeah, just a couple of things. One, we said it, Mike said it, you've got to go out and talk to these elected officials, whether it's here in Washington, D.C., whether it's at the state, or whether it's in the community you live. You want to see change happen, that's where it's going to occur. The second thing, we talk about our report card on America's infrastructure. We talk about it as individual 16 categories, but the fact of the matter is this infrastructure works as one big thing. You can't have a great wastewater treatment plant system if you don't have a good electrical system, because wastewater treatment plants are some of the largest users of electricity. You can't have a great port system if you don't have an inland waterways to get the goods to port. So while it's great we're going to put money on individual infrastructure, it's got to work together. You got to make the entire investment.
Great. Francis?
Thank you. And what I would just say is that as we plan for our infrastructure future, which we have to do, and it has to be climate resilient, and I hope that all of you, having been here at the Blue-Green Alliance Conference, will go out and really demand climate action and demand that our new infrastructure systems are clean, affordable, safe, and that they really provide for the American public in the future in a way that people expect. And that'll only happen if you raise your voices, because it's certainly not happening without them. Thank you.
With that, I'd like to invite everyone to applaud a great panel. Thank you very much.